When the global crisis hit, daily life ground to a violent halt. Missiles launched, markets crashed, and citizens poured into the streets in panic. Ajay watched his decade of savings evaporate in real time as his stock portfolio crashed to zero, wiping out his entire financial history in a single afternoon. He rushed to secure his remaining cash, only to find the banking system frozen. Thousands of people waited in endless lines, desperately trying to withdraw their money, but the banks refused to dispense more than a tiny fraction. On paper, Ajay had been a millionaire just days prior. In reality, with his company freezing salaries and his cash trapped inside a failing bank, he lacked the means to pay rent or feed his family. Digital numbers provide a feeling of immense security. The moment the physical infrastructure supporting them collapses, those numbers are exposed as total illusions. Ajay and his childhood friend Sahil took completely opposite paths. Ajay moved to Mu City to chase aggressive stock market returns, while Sahil stayed behind in their village to accumulate physical, tangible assets. Ajay's absolute obsession with compounding digital returns led to a fatal miscalculation. He sold his physical village home, pooling every cent he had to buy more shares on a screen. Out of options, Ajay made a desperate phone call to Sahil. He expected his friend to be equally ruined by the global market crash. Sahil's response was a relief. He warmly welcomed Ajay, telling him to bring his family to the village and take shelter at his estate for as long as they needed. Ajay's digital portfolio couldn't provide a place to sleep or food to eat, leaving him stranded. Sahil's estate, with its grain, its functional tractors, and physical shelter, became a practical refuge for his friend's entire family. Ajay arrived at the village fully expecting hardship. Instead, he found Sahil living in total abundance, completely shielded from the chaos tearing the rest of the world apart. Sahil's first asset was productive land. During the 1923 hyperinflation crisis in Weimar Germany, city bankers holding government bonds and savings accounts watched their entire life savings drop to zero by November. Meanwhile, farmers just 40 miles outside the city amassed immense wealth. The raw value of their physical crops skyrocketed as the currency died, reducing paper money to literal playthings for children. The exact scenario repeated during the 2008 Zimbabwe crisis. Citizens carried notes worth trillions of dollars that bought nothing, proving that those who control the food supply hold absolute power when paper fails. The second asset was gold. Gold operates as an insurance policy against the failure of fiat currency, rather than a standard investment designed to yield quarterly returns. During the French Revolution, the government issued paper currency called assignats. Within 5 years, that paper lost 99% of its value, wiping out entire families. Those who had converted their wealth into physical gold survived completely intact. Over the last 30 years, the very central banks that issue our paper notes have been quietly hoarding massive stockpiles of physical gold for themselves. When systemic trust evaporates, human society immediately reverts to valuing raw. The third asset was essential goods businesses. There is a distinct difference between selling luxury items and owning businesses that supply absolute necessities, like medicine, fuel, and cooking oil. During Brazil's hyperinflation crisis in the 1980s, the pricing power of essential goods protected business owners. Supermarkets were flooded with crowds panic buying whatever physical inventory they could grab. This chart shows how those dynamics work. While supermarkets in Brazil had to change their price tags multiple times a day, the violently spiking curve you see here, the flat line representing the underlying utility of that inventory never dropped. The fourth asset was stable foreign currencies. Keeping all your liquidity tied to a single national economy is a massive vulnerability. In the 1980s, a massive debt crisis swept through Latin America. The middle classes in places like Mexico and Argentina were entirely wiped out because they held their savings entirely in local currency. Wealthy families in those same regions maintained their purchasing power by diversifying their liquid cash into stable foreign assets, like the US dollar. True economic security requires owning the supply lines people cannot live without, and holding reserve currencies that outlast local governmental failures. The fifth asset was real estate. Physical structures retain their intrinsic value regardless of what happens to the underlying currency printed by the state. Returning to Weimar Germany, property values eventually shot up into the billions of marks. The numbers became meaningless, but the buildings still stood, people still needed shelter, and the physical asset retained its worth. The sixth and most powerful asset was essential practical skills. This is the ultimate protection because it exists entirely within the individual and cannot be confiscated. Look at the 1946 Hungarian hyperinflation crisis, where prices doubled every 15 hours. Government workers relying on fixed salaries were instantly pushed into poverty. Meanwhile, plumbers, electricians, and mechanics thrived. They bypassed the broken economy entirely by negotiating their payments directly in food and essential goods through a localized barter system. Specialized skills and physical shelter form the absolute baseline of human survival. You cannot inflate them, freeze them, or tax them out of existence. Sitting on the farm, Ajay finally understood. He thought he was the smart one for chasing digital numbers, but Sahil had secured actual survival and reality. Sahil operated on a strict philosophy. In a crisis, wealth is never destroyed. It is simply transferred from those holding fragile assets to those holding real ones. Sahil then reached into his desk and handed Ajay a stack of papers. They were the physical deeds to Ajay's old village home. Sahil had bought it years ago, quietly holding onto it specifically to protect his friend. Sahil acquired this foresight through dedicated financial education and reading history. He relied on platforms that summarize critical books to quickly gather the lessons of the past. The digital economy failed when the systems behind it broke, but the land, the gold, and the practical skills endured. These physical assets provided a baseline for survival that outlasted the crisis.